on a couple of these skins, in order to get the longest length possible, what I did was I took this section right here, I trimmed it off in width, but in length it was a little short. So what I'm going to do is trim this up, just cut this little edge off right here so it's a fresh edge. And then I'm going to move this piece up so I get that corner filled in. And then I'll have my whole width that I want to use out of this. So I've done a couple of these, and like that's how it looks when I'm done. And it looks good on the fur side. So you just have to kind of like when you measure, leave it attached until you're sure. And so I'm going to trim the rest of this off, move it up, slice that off, and then retrim it. So that's something that you can do to make sure that you get the right configuration. So I'm using 16 of the 18 beaver pelts that I nailed out for the body of the blanket. And I've got these stacked in rows. Row 1, row 2, row 3, and then there's another row at the top. So 4 rows, and it's 4 across. So 16. I've got 2 extra left over. I might put a border on the top edge using those. I'm not quite sure. But this side of the blanket is a little lighter in tone, and it goes to darker on that side. It ended up being the best way to do it. My bottom row is a little longer. I think it's like 22 or 23 inches long. The rest of my rows all ended up being like, I think this row is 21. The other 2 ended up being 20, and they're all in 20 inches in width. I trimmed them to that. So it took a while to lay this out and flip-flop them around, and it looks kind of messy, but they're just set on top of each other. I was able to match them out pretty well. Now, after I had this matched out, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to join this bottom row going across. Then I'm going to join the second row, the third row, and the fourth row. After I get these 2 rows joined across, I'm going to put them together. And then I'll do the same with the top 2 rows, put them together. I label each skin row 1, skin 1, row 1, skin 2, going across, likewise for the ones going up, so I keep them in the right order. And I'm going to be reblocking this out after I get my rows joined. So I'm going to block this in 2 sections. I'm going to sew these 2 rows together totally, and then I'm going to sew the top 2 rows together totally, block that section of the blanket out, and then I'm going to join row 2 and row 3 together, and my blanket will be all joined up unless I decide to put a border on it. So we'll see how it goes, but this took a little bit of flip-flopping around. I mean, I moved these all over. These are beaver, I believe, from Ohio. Some of them are a little lighter, some of them are a little darker, but nice quality fur, and it's they nailed out nice. So this should make a nice blanket. Well, I've got everything sewed up in 2 sections. This is the lower section, so it's 2 high, and then it is 4 wide. I wet it, re-wet it with leather ease. I've got the basin back there. Let it sit for probably about 15 minutes until it was, nice and soft again. And started at the one edge and went down this way, went halfway across, then I pulled straight down till I got my centers pretty even, and then I did the same thing on the other side. So when you have something this large, what's smart is you wet it, but I folded this half over on itself while I was working on this half over here, so it wouldn't dry. And I also had a spray bottle with the same stuff inside that I use for wetting, so I keep that damp. You know, sometimes if I got a project that's really big, I might use like a plastic bag or something to put down so it doesn't dry out too fast. But this will dry overnight, and then I'm going to mark it and square it, tape it, and then do the next section, and then we're going to sew those two sections together. I want to show you how I'm squaring this blanket off or blocking it out. So I did the first half, which is down here, just like I'm doing the second half. And after I had the first half done, what I did was, you see my lines here going up and going across. I squared it off and did it all the way up to past the area that I nailed it the first time. So this was the area that I nailed it to the first time, this line going down. And now I'm nailing the second part. You know, I've got this piece of plastic that's a plastic, lightweight plastic sheet. And it's so nice because I can lay this on my goods, whatever it is, and I've got some marks on it. So when I lay it on top of my blanket, it's easy to square the entire thing by just rotating and shifting that sheet of plastic. I don't have to, you know, like use a yardstick or a square, because that's already square, and it just simplifies things so much for me. So what I did on my second nailing was I put this line, which was a squared line, on close to the edge of my board, and the edge of my board is square, so I don't have to worry about that. So I nailed on the line, and then I nailed on the other side of the line to keep that nice and straight. Then what I did was I wet the other half of my blanket, just like I would have the first time on the other side that I already did. I wet that with the spray bottle and folded it over on itself so it would kind of rest for probably about 5 or 10 minutes. I didn't have to wait real long with this. And then I started nailing, and I started at the top edge and I came across. I already had this taped from before because I had squared this out once before. So I'm just re-squaring this and re-blocking this because I added this border on 3 sides. So I just wanted this to, I don't know, get as good as I could get it. And so I wet it, and then I started at this end, the top end, and I went across to this corner, got that blocked out. Then I went across and got the width at the middle, stapled that, and then I went down to the bottom and I went across the bottom area and stapled that, and then I worked out my sides and I worked out my length. I don't think I had to take out too many staples, but this will dry overnight and it should turn out great. The next thing I'm going to do is put the weft cloth on this. That's that kind of like interfacing that I use, and that helps stabilize the blanket. So I'm going to use that, and so this is a roll of that. I've got to cut 2 pieces lengthwise that are long enough to go together and sew them together before I put it on, because this only is 60 inches wide and my blanket is, I don't know, close to 90, I think. So this is a 16, 4, 8, 16, 17, almost 18 skin blanket. And then after I get the weft cloth on, I'll put the quilted nylon on the back of this. I'm going to use that because it's a little lighter weight. This is already plenty heavy, and it'll not be quite as much of a drag when they use this blanket. So we want to eliminate as much friction as we can. The larger the goods, the more, you know, it's going to sound kind of funny, but the more fragile they can be. because people just don't understand that it takes a lot of pressure and weight on these skins when you move them if they don't have backing on it like that weft cloth. You can use a lightweight sheet or China silk, but you should have something that's sewn into the backing of your fur. And when I put that on, I'm going to follow like my seam lines, and I'll be tacking it a couple of times on the seam lines, and then I'll also be tacking it midway on the skins. I use a loose stitch that doesn't show, and it smooths out really nice. So once I get this off the board, squared and off the board, we'll show you how we're going to do that. I wanted to show you what this looks like after I have the weft cloth pinned on. So this is what that fabric looks like. It has a iron-on or fusible factor on one side, and then the other side is just smooth. I don't fuse it. I just pin it on, and then what I'm going to do is, you can see right through it. That's why I like it so much. But this fabric is really strong, and it's lightweight. It hardly weighs, it doesn't weigh hardly anything. So that's why I like it. I can see through it. Do all my pins going the same direction. I start at the top, pin it across and down. All my pins are going the same way, and just about every pin point that I have on here, I'm going to be making a connection to from the leather. I'm going to be stitching this right on that seam point right here, stitching it through and catching it, and I'll be doing that all over the blanket. Now the edge, before I did that, I came to the edge and I cold taped the edge. I trimmed and cold taped my edge all the way around. And then when I get to the edge on this with my weft, what I'm going to do is trim this back. I haven't trimmed this edge. I did trim this edge a little better. So when I get here to my edge, I do the edge last. I just turn this into the inside, and then I'm going to just tack this several spots all the way around on the edge. So when I sew my liner on, my liner will be incorporated. It's going to hold the weft, the fur, and the liner. So it takes a little time to pin this down, but once it's pinned down, you can see how smooth it is, and it really adds very, very, very little weight, but it adds a lot of support. So that's why we like this. You can use a sheet, but you're not going to be able to see through it. And this is like, I don't know, maybe $3.50 a yard. So 60 inches wide. I seamed it going across down near the other end of the blanket. So I encourage you to look for this. You can get it at Waywack Sewing Supplies. Otherwise, I buy a big quantity and I get it online for a little cheaper. But it's a good value. I want to show you how I attach this weft cloth to my blanket. So what I do is I loosen the tension quite a bit on my thread, and I've got a longer stitch. So my stitch length is set, you know, pretty long. And then basically it's just every place that I've got a pin, I just am going to take a bite through the fabric into the leather, and I just about lost that, but I go about maybe 1.5 inches, 2 inches long, and that's it. So once you've got that down, then what you do is you come back after the whole blanket's done, and you're going to smooth this out with either the back end of your knife or your finger, and it lays really nice and flat, and you don't see it from the fur side. So I've done this all over the blanket, and I'm just about finished. It probably took me about 45 minutes to do this, but it helps keep this attached to the leather side of the blanket, and it works good. I want to show you how this looks after I've got the weft cloth down. So the blanket is nice and smooth. This fits like a second skin, and you can see where I've tacked it a couple of places all over. And all I did was, after I got done, was I took my back of my knife blade, or you can take your thumbnail or whatever, and you just flatten that basting stitch down. And I'm going to slip my hand in here. See how nice that's got that supported? So that's like, I don't know, every foot and a half all the way down, and the whole length of the blanket. On the edge, what I did was I turned it. You can see this. I turned the selvage and I tack that on the edge, so it'll sew into my liner when I get my lining attached. And I'm going to trim this back just a little bit more so it's not quite as generous, but anyway, I think it's going to be great. This is the best support that you can give any type of fur blanket, and I hope you put the effort in if you're doing one. This really makes a big difference in how long your blanket will last. I want to show you how I did the lining for this. I'm in the process of putting it on. And what I do is I take my fabric, I press back ample seam allowance, because this will be my turned edge. And I start on the longest edge of the blanket, and I sew the lining down one side, and then I also press the far end, and I do like down the one side and then across the bottom by fur machine. So when I sew this on, I'm sewing the lining to the leather, and I'm also catching that weft at the same time. So I do this all the way down the side and then across the bottom. Now, after I've got that done, I come back and I turn it. I pin it so that it's flat, and then I'm going to mark my other side where it needs to be turned. So after I get this flat, I'm going to turn this side and I pin it so I know that it's right on the edge. I leave a little bit of excess, not much. I'm not turning this right on the fur edge. I'm turning it just a little bit more towards the lining side. And then I'll sew the far edge and the top. I usually leave an opening about maybe 15 inches along one edge so I can turn the blanket inside out. It's a lot of pinning, but it turns out nice. So this is the blanket on the fur side, and you can see how nice and flat it lays, and it does a nice job. So the other alternative you'd have would be to sew binding on the edge, a satin binding on the edge, turn the satin binding in, and then hand stitch your lining on the outside. So this saves quite a bit of time when you do it by machine. It's not easy, but it can be done. And once I get this other far side pinned down, I kind of like treat it like a burrito, and I make one big inverted pillowcase kind of like, and then sew it. It's a lot of pinning, but it gets done nice. And this is going to look lovely when it's finished. So this is a big blanket at king size. This works so slick on a throw or a smaller size blanket, but king size is a lot to manage. And I can sew this. I've sewed this whole blanket with my A machine. So if you have a B machine, it's a little easier probably, but the A machine works great. And this is a quilted nylon that I like. It's sold by Weft, and we have, and it comes in, it's 60 inches wide. So it does, on this blanket, I did have a seam across the center, but Waywax sells it, and I love it. The only thing you have to be careful of is when you press it, you don't want to get your iron on this side because it'll melt it. So you just press this nylon side right near the edge, and then it's fine. I want to show you how this seam looks after I've got it sewed. This is the lining, and then I've got my weft cloth and the leather of my beaver blanket. So it's all sandwiched into one seam. And what I do is I have that lining pinned back, and then I go on the edge of where it's pinned and I mark it with chalk. And then I also do a hash mark going across. I turn it and then I tack it on those hash marks. And I do them probably about every 8 inches. Then I know that I've got it turned on the right edge, and it will match, and it will lay nice because my hash marks meet. So it takes a little bit of effort to do that, but I've got that completed. On the edge where I left opening, I put a piece of silk binding. You can see that I attached that just to the fur side, and this is where I'm going to turn my entire blanket from. I probably left an opening of about, I don't know, 15 inches, and I'm going to trim all my lining fabric back to about 1 inch from the selvage, and then miter my corners. I'll be mitering my corners on my lining up here, and then I'm going to turn it. So the next thing I do is I take and do a kind of like a long running stitch on the edge of the lining and attach that to the fur all the way around the perimeter of the blanket. And I'll show you how I do that. On the edge that I put that silk binding for my opening, what I do is I just turn that silk binding back and then hand stitch it down. Then what I'm going to do is bring my lining over the edge, and I'll close that up so you won't see that opening. So here's that edge closed up. Now, if you didn't want to sew this lining onto your fur by fur machine, this is what you'd do. You'd sew that, take a narrow piece of seam binding, cut on the bias, press the one edge. I buy mine pre-done, and then you sew that around the perimeter. Then you'd tack that back like I had it tacked along the edge, and then you'd bring your lining over that edge and sew it down by hand. So it does look nice when it's completed like that. So you don't necessarily have to sew your lining to your fur by fur machine. I do like to use Rice's hand sewing thread. I buy it at Samuel Bauer, and it comes in a skein. It has a little tab at the end that you crack off, and then the thread is looped over a piece of cardboard at the end. You cut the loop and remove that excess cardboard, and then each one of these strands comes out. It's pre-waxed. It works beautiful. They have it in all different colors. So anyway, that's what I like to use. And I always get the size C. Right here it says what size it is. A is finer, C is a nice weight. I have my lining on, and it's all sewn around the edge by Fur Machine in that one spot that I had opened where I closed it, that I left to turn it. So now what I did was I took my blanket, laid it first side down, and I patted out this lining so it was nice and smooth. What I like to do is use a clamp up on the edge of my table up there, and I clamp the lining down at the corner, the width of my table, and I have to do it twice because this is a big size blanket. But I clamp the lining down, and then I pull it so I know I've got that I've got it flat underneath. And I also do it from side to side. So this lays really nice and smooth. You can see this. And then I pin it about every, I don't know, 15, 16 inches apart. And I'd have like several rows done on this. You can see that. And then at the edge, I come down about maybe 3 or 4 inches from the edge. Well, this had that border. So I pinned it on that seam for the border. And now what I do is I like to use that Rice's hand sewing thread, and I use a double thread. I've got a Glover, which is a 3-corner pointed needle, which works good for this. And I take a running stitch all the way around the edge of the blanket, about 1 inch up, the width of my finger, and the stitches are about 1 inch apart. And that will secure this lining at the edge going around the entire blanket. Then what I do is after I've got that done, I come and about every spot that I have this pinned, you see this quilting is a good like invisible area. It doesn't show because this is quilted. And what I do is I take that running stitch just like I did down here on the bottom, and I quilt around a square cube of about 4 of these squares. And I just attach, I go down, and with my needle and thread, I can feel that weft cloth underneath. I don't go down into the fur, I just go down into the weft cloth. And I connect and make my stitch in a cube, like I said, about every 14, 15 inches. And then what happens is your blanket, your lining is going to stay attached to your blanket and it won't float. Now this still has a little bit of, give to it as far as it's got a little bit of loft in between those quiltings, but it's not going to be like a duvet where the lining is separate from the fur. This will keep this nice and secure. This blanket will last for a long time because when you pull on it, you're pulling on it as one unit. You're pulling the entire blanket instead of just pulling the lining or just pulling the fur. And it'll keep that fur from stretching out, and this will last for a long time. So it's worth the effort if you're going to put something together like this and you want a quality product. I can't think of a better way to do it.